Hi, Ambassador. Good to have you back on the program. Thanks for making the time.
It is good to be on your air, Vassy. Good to see you from a country away.
Exactly. Two capital cities apart, I guess. I wanted to start off and ask you, look, I think it's a fair assessment to say that the two candidates don't agree on much. The one thing I have heard both of them say is the way in which they're characterizing this election as hugely consequential and historic. Do you think that's the right assessment?
Well, I think all presidential elections in the United States are consequential. But I have been observing, and I think it's important to make the point to Canadians who operate under a very different electoral political system, that the presidential election is one of literally hundreds of elections that are taking place today in the United States. The federal government alone, there are 34 Senate races, 435 House races, and a presidential election. And then on top of that, there are 13 governor's races and countless mayor's races, state legislative races, commissioner races, judge races, and elections. So there is a diversity and dispersion of the electoral process in the United States that is very different from Canada, which is one of the things that creates a durability, resiliency, and continuity to our policy-level decisions in the aftermath of even consequential elections.
And I want to ask you about the potential for that durability. I think the reason the reason there is so much focus on this election, in particular, the presidential aspect of it, is because of who the candidates are. And in particular, Donald Trump, your boss, President Joe Biden, has called him an existential threat to democracy. I've heard you on many instances, though, argue that democracy will prevail. Which is it?
Well, they both can be true. I do believe that that democracy will prevail. In the United States, we have almost 250 years of democracy. We've had challenges on multiple occasions through those nearly 2.5 centuries. You can pick your challenges. We had a civil war in our country that threatened to divide the country. In the 1950s, we had the communist scare. In the 1960s, we had the civil rights era that threatened to tear our country apart. The hallmark of all of those challenges to our democracy has been that the country has come together and that it's come out the other side of those challenges stronger than it was before, with democracy triumphant. And I think that will be the story of the day, which is that democracy is won. And it's why I'm excited about election days and why I'm excited about the electoral process, because it is the ultimate demonstration of a vibrant and functioning democracy to conduct free and open elections. And that's what we're doing today.
And I share that excitement about the democratic process, but I have also listened very closely to the Trump campaign and the candidate himself lay some groundwork for the possibility of rejecting the outcome even of that democratic process. And I wonder, do you have any concern about there not being a peaceful transfer of power?
So, we've talked to each other enough, Vassy. You know me well. One of the things I scrupulously try to avoid are hypothetical questions. That is the ultimate hypothetical question, which I'm really not prepared to answer, except to say that if there are challenges to the election, that also is part of the democratic process, and I trust our process to be able to address those challenges and to deal with them, and at the end of the day, democracy will be triumphant.
And I understand that you don't love hypothetical questions. I do understand that. But I also know that the Canadian government is dealing in the possibility of that hypothetical, that there could be three outcomes. One, that Vice President Harris wins. Two, that former President Trump wins. Three, that there isn't a winner for a while, or that there is, political violence to contest whatever the outcome seems to be. Is it really that hypothetical, I guess? Do you think, as somebody who represents your country to Canadians, that Canadians should be worried at all about what happens in the coming days?
I don't think Canadians should be worried about what happens in the current days. I'd remind everyone that we have some pretty recent history with the lack of clarity about the outcome of a presidential election. It was only in 2000 that it took 5 weeks to declare a winner in the presidential campaign. The democracy, the United States didn't fall apart. The government didn't fall apart. There wasn't violence. Democracy again survived. The very structure of the American government and democracy in the American government provided for a way for those disputes to be resolved in a way that the United States came out the other end of those disputes as a stronger and more vibrant democracy than when it went into those disputes.
I wanted to circle back as well to the comment you made about the durability of the relationship between Canada and the U.S. And you've made this point on a number of instances in a number of interviews and we've conducted in speeches I've heard you make. I think given the rhetoric in this election, primarily from Trump, but also from Vice President Harris around trade, NAFTA, the defense issues, defense spending, the border, like the list goes on, right? We feel like this election is especially relevant to us because of how interdependent the relationship is. Do you really believe that the relationship between Canada and the U.S. is insulated from whatever the outcome of this is?
The basic answer to that question is yes. I mean, insulated may be a slightly too strong word for it, but I do think that the Canada-U.S. relationship will survive. It's been an enduring relationship for over 100 years. It's incredibly important to both the United States and to Canada. If you take trade as an example, we enjoy $3.4 billion Canadian dollars a day in trade that crosses both of our borders. I haven't heard any candidate in any election, including in this election, say that they're ready to chuck overboard $3.4 billion daily trade relationship between our two countries. And let's remember that trade is not conducted by the President of the United States. I need to return to the fact that there are hundreds of elections occurring here. 34 members of the Senate, 435 members of the House, 13 governors, countless mayors, state legislatures, city councils, commissioners, and judges. And all those institutions, plus individual businesses, business associations, civil society, they're all an integral part of the Canada-United States relationship, and most of them aren't even on the ballot. So let's focus, we'll stay on trade for a second, and note the importance of subnational trade. There are 36 states in the United States that count Canada as their largest export destination. And you don't hear a word from any one of those states about disrupting the significant trade relationship that exists between the United States and Canada, because it's not in anyone's interest to do so. So that's the benefit that we get from a strong, significant, enduring, and diverse relationship between our two countries. And it is a major reason why I have such a high level of confidence that those relationships will continue in the aftermath of this one single election among hundreds of elections that are taking place today.
If I remember correctly, soon after you arrived in Canada, that was a primary piece of advice that you offered to people who were worried about the status of the relationship. Like, remember that there are these other levels of government. Does that remain, regardless of the outcome tonight or this week, your key piece of advice as the federal government and provincial governments and everyone gets together to approach this as Team Canada once again?
I do think that the stability, the strength, the durability, and the power of the overall relationship between Canada and the United States is rooted in the extensive reach among different levels of government, even at the federal level, among different federal elected officials, the shared values of our two countries, the history of this relationship, the engagement of other non-governmental stakeholders, and that is absolutely the case regardless of the outcome of the presidential election tonight.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note then. Ambassador, I appreciate you making the time as always. Thank you.
Vassy, thank you. Enjoy yourself in Washington.
I will. Thanks, sir.